Is a senior information architect and content strategist at New Signature with 13 years experience focusing on complex and content-heavy website and internet implementations. Jessie is a solid champion for solid content strategies and a mobile-first approach to information architecture. She's worked with a broad range of clients, including AARP, the U.S. Department of State, and the World Bank. Jessie earned her BA in economics from the College of William and Mary and her master's in information systems from the University of Michigan. Jessie, if you're ready, you can take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Allison. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you can all hear me all right. Let Christine know if in the chat window if that's not working out, and I can go ahead and try to adjust things for you. Also, if you have questions at any time during the presentation, I know that you're all muted, but if you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and chat, and Christine will get that question up to me, and we can see what's going on. All right. So obviously, everybody's prepared today to talk about going mobile, and so am I. So that's good. We're in good shape. What I want to start out by saying is that going mobile is in some ways a little bit like climbing Everest. You need a strong team. You need a determined team who has a lot of endurance. You have to do a lot of planning. And if you look at this image, frankly, it looks a little cold, kind of lonely, and pretty hard. And I'll be honest, I don't find this particularly appealing. In fact, not at all. But the good news is that I understand it. Climbing Everest is not actually a very technical climb. It's demanding, obviously. It's not easy. Not everyone can do it. But not only the elite can do it. It's not a select group that can do it. And going mobile is the same way. It's not an easy hill to climb. You're going to have to make some changes to get there. But it's not impossible. And it's not something that only a few people can do. And the nice part is that focusing on your users and focusing on your content is going to get you really far. And in fact, it's that same focus that makes sure that you will be successful, not only in the short run, but in the long run as well. So don't despair. So I want to start off by first laying some groundwork so that we all have kind of a shared understanding of what we're talking about and where the industry is, because things are changing and they're changing really quickly. If this isn't something that you're focusing on all the time, you may not have even noticed how much of a shift has occurred. It wasn't all that long ago, even just a couple years ago, that mobile browsing was kind of a novelty. And I think it's important that we consider how times have changed, or in other words, I will tell you why you should care about phones and tablets and phablets and now watches and Google Glasses. Or maybe you can skip the Google Glasses for now. We'll wait a little bit. So first things first, I want to point out that most of these statistics are taken from the Pew Internet Research Center, and they do focus on American populations. And I think most of our clients, given that we're in the Washington, D.C. area, do tend to focus on American audiences. If you are looking global, the stats do shift a little bit, and I don't have those stats with me today, so we're going to focus on the American audience. It's pretty much a given today that everybody has a phone. 91% of American adults own a mobile phone. Now that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a smartphone, but it does seem that smartphone penetration is now at about 56, and in some cases people are saying it's breaking 60%. So 60% of American adults have a smartphone. And if you look at that, going back to the figure of 91% of Americans, 63% of those phone owners say that they use their phones to access the internet. All right, so a very large portion of adults in the U.S. are accessing the internet on their phones. This is not a small group anymore. This is just about everybody that you know is using their phone to access the internet. And what's even more interesting is that if you look at certain minority groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and especially young adults, that penetration is much, much higher. So it's important to think about who your audience might be, and if you are targeting some of those minority groups, being prepared to have your site go mobile is even more important. Now, moreover, 34% of these mobile internet users say that they mostly go online using their phone. So I don't see this trend reversing. I imagine that as time goes on, people who use their phones to access the internet are going to do so more so. They're not going to start doing it less. So anyone who's using it mostly may soon be using it all the time. And anyone who's using it a little bit may soon be using it mostly. And if you think about those minority groups that we talked about before, and it's not just blacks and Hispanics, but low-income Americans, less educated Americans, and again, it's the young adults. A lot of times they are mobile-only users. And the reason for this can a lot of times have to do with the fact that they may not be able to afford a desktop computer or a high-speed internet connection in their home. I mean, that's not an inexpensive proposition. And with the ubiquity of Wi-Fi now, you can go just about anywhere and use your phone to get the things done that you need to get done. So in a lot of cases, and especially when you're talking about these minority groups, this is the only way they're able to look at your site. So it's not just that you need a mobile site as a good alternative. You need a mobile site as a baseline, because otherwise people are not even going to be able to look at your content. So here's another interesting way to look at this as well. 77% of mobile searches take place at home or work. So you're not sitting on the bus. You're not waiting for the train. You're not at a restaurant waiting for your friend to show up. You might be sitting at your couch. You might be sitting at your desk at work. You just don't want to do the search on your work computer. Or your phone was closer to your hand than something else. So you decide to pick up your phone and do the browsing. And if you find what you need, you're all done. But 90% of people who maybe start a task on one device, like their phone, may actually get up off the couch and go complete it at their desktop computer somewhere else. Or maybe they'll go pick up their laptop and bring it over because they decided they want to look at something a little bit more closely. But this can also work in the reverse. Sometimes people will be using their desktop computer, maybe even at work. They're going through their news feeds. They decide to send a few articles to Pocket or some other e-reader, and then later, maybe on their way home from work as they're sitting on the bus, they'll pull that article up and read it in detail. So it doesn't mean that people are just doing light browsing on their mobile devices. It means that they might be doing in-depth reading, and people will read on a mobile device. I mean, you've probably seen it if you take public transportation. You've probably seen people reading entire novels on their phone because you can, and it's there, and it's in your hand, and it's small, and it's easy. So don't just assume that someone's not going to read because they're on a mobile device. It may be their only option, or just maybe their best option at the time. Now, another thing I think is really interesting is that we have managed to take multitasking to a whole new level. So 86% of mobile internet users say they use their mobile devices while watching television. And you can see the guy in this picture is watching TV, has his laptop on his lap, and is using his phone at the same time. And I suspect there are some of you out there who have done the same thing. In fact, you might be doing it right now while you're listening to me. So not only do you have to capture a user's attention, but now you're competing with NCIS or Jimmy Fallon, and your content better be pretty good to do that. So let me review for a second and tell you what all this boils down to. First off, we really can't ignore mobile users. They're there, they're growing, and they're using it more and more. The other thing is that you can't just assume that because a user is on a particular device that they want to achieve a particular goal. Now, there are times when this is, you can develop specific web apps or specific tools that you expect people to use on their phone. But when it comes to your website, you don't necessarily know what they want to know just because they're on a phone. You also have to be able to support cross-device browsing, which means you need the experience to be similar on all these different devices. Your architecture has to be the same. Someone needs to be able to find the content that they could find at their desk while they're on their phone. Now, it doesn't mean that the presentation of that content will be exactly the same, but they need to know it's there. They need to be able to access that content. So, there may be some shifts and some changes in the way it is presented, but it is always there. All right, so it's time for our first reality check, and we're going to do a couple of these throughout the presentation. So the first question I have for you is, have you actually looked at your phone, looked at your site on your phone? And I suspect there's a chance that some of you are scared to do that. You don't like to do that, or it makes you uncomfortable. And unfortunately, excuse me, I have to let you know that this is not a valid strategy. So even though you don't want to look at it, you want to pretend it's not there, we can still see you. We can still see your bad user experience on the phone, and we want you to make it better. All right, so let's think about this for a second. I have a little news flash for you. The web is not the same as print. And I know this is not news to a lot of you. In some senses, it's painfully obvious. In a lot of ways, the world of web content has been able to evolve so quickly because we've borrowed so much from the print world. We've borrowed the concept of different roles in an organization. We've borrowed the whole concept of publishing and the way publishing workflows happen. We've borrowed the idea of pages and page layouts. We've really relied on the expertise of those with experience in the print world to help move us forward. There's probably a lot of people in your organization, and maybe even you yourself, have a background in the print world that you have now translated to the online world. But, we know the web and the print are not the same. Of course they're not the same. But deep in your heart of hearts, I want you to be honest with yourself for just a moment and think about the fact that you probably think of your website as a series of pages. And these pages all have a particular layout. And the pages together all form this discrete collection of items that maybe is kind of like a magazine or a book. You expect users to read it a certain way, and you expect users to be able to experience it all the same way. In fact, I suspect that you spend a lot of time and effort trying to make sure that the presentation of your content is consistent for all of those readers. So unfortunately, you need to stop. You need to stop right now because it's not easy to do that. I do it too. In fact, it's a constant challenge. I still create sitemaps that show a series of pages connecting to one another. I help people craft content on a page-by-page basis. So while we still kind of operate in that mode, we need to work in our heads to kind of break that mental model and think of content as just content, not content as it is related to a particular layout on the screen. Now luckily, we have a scapegoat that we can blame for all of this. We can blame our CMS. And we do blame our CMSs for a lot. So let's just add one more thing, it won't hurt them. So once upon a time, I think the CMS did a really good job of separating the layout, page layout and presentation from the actual content itself. And if you look at this form on the screen, you can see what an ancient CMS used to look like. Ancient as in, 5-6 years ago. So you can see it's just a form, you fill it out. There's no editors, there's no modules that you can pop on the page, there's no widgets to move around. You just fill out the form and you hit insert and you hope that it looks okay on the screen. And if you're lucky, you have some kind of preview mode, and if you're not lucky, you just wait until you publish it and then you go and see what it looks like and you come back and edit it later. So of course, our editors and authors complained that there's not enough control here. You can't help lay out a page if you don't have any of these nifty tools. And so we entered the age of the WYSIWYG. Now to some extent, WYSIWYGs are necessary because they allow us to change formatting by putting bullets in a paragraph or bolding some text or even adding a text link in the page. Those are things that WYSIWYGs are good at. Things that WYSIWYGs should not be used for are laying out the actual page, moving things around, letting people make text different colors and crazy sizes, and really even inserting images all over the place can be a big problem. So another thing is that, by doing this, we have created this illusion that we are building a series of pages and that we are laying things out as though we're managing a magazine. And in fact, some of these tools have gotten so out of control that we end up spending a lot of time asking developers to lock down the tools in order to help people, avoid hurting themselves and doing more harm than good. So the real problem is that interfaces like this just don't help the editors build content in a way that then the CMS can build meaningful markup. And that means that your content's not being tagged or treated in such a way that it allows it to be displayed properly on a variety of devices. So you have the illusion that you have really carefully controlled things, when in fact you haven't done that at all. And another bubble I have to burst for you is that pixel perfect design is an absolute myth. You can go seeking Shangri-La and you're not going to get there. And I think a lot of you probably have experienced this in many ways. So we get these detailed Photoshop layouts and we have design presentations with the vendors, and it's very exciting and they look really pretty. And then you go and you present it to your CEO and you use the monitor in his office. Or you go to another conference room and you use the big projector and display it on a wall in the conference room. And the colors don't look right, and the fold isn't in the same place, and it just doesn't look as crisp or clean or awesome as it did when your designer did the presentation. And we kind of, as a group, sort of have dismissed this over the years. We don't worry about it too much. We just say, oh, it's just, it's just because of this machine. But really what we've been doing is ignoring the fact that it's every machine. Every machine is going to be a little bit different. And we can't pretend that this isn't happening anymore. So whereas we used to pretend that there was a standard screen size and we would design to that standard screen size, I mean, it's just not possible. The fact is we are facing a larger and larger variety of screen sizes. They're getting smaller and smaller, and they're getting more and more varied. Not only can you have a phone or a tablet, but you might be holding it in portrait or landscape. You might have a retina display. And you might even have an enormous display. Oops, sorry. You might have an enormous display in a conference room that is huge. And you have to make sure that your site looks okay on that screen as well. So if you are designing for any one of these screen sizes, you're really missing out on the vast majority of experiences that users might have. And to make it even worse, that's not all. Screen size is not the only variable that you're working with here. You've got different kinds of devices that run different browsers, and they're on different platforms, and maybe they're different versions of the tool. So, the variables are just becoming insurmountable. You just can't treat it the same way we always have. So it's time for another reality check. And I want you to just take a moment and realize that you have no control. And if this upsets you, maybe it helps if you think about the fact that you never did have any of this control. So we have to take a deep breath and just let it go. Let the pixels go. Be at peace with the fact that you can't control when or how or on what device someone's going to consume your content. You just have to resolve to do the best job you can at presenting your organization or presenting your product or making your pitch or whatever it is by using high-quality content, and you can't tie it to the layout. Okay, so I spent a lot of time bursting all your bubbles and making you feel really bad, and it sounds awful and it sounds overwhelming, and it sort of is. IAs and content strategists and developers and designers, we've been struggling with this now for a few years. And the good news is that we are learning, and we do have a plan. So one aspect of this plan is the concept of responsive design. This probably is not the first time you've heard this, so I'm not breaking new ground here. But I want to talk about what responsive design really is and what you have to do in order to use it or take advantage of it. So responsive design is only really part of a whole host of activities that would be intended to make your site more adaptive to the user's needs. So in a nutshell, responsive design has to do with how content is presented on different screen sizes. A responsive site will alter the layout and presentation based on information that's detected about the device's screen size. Okay? It is not going to decide to present different content based on what the user's doing or where they are. I mean, those sorts of things are more about the idea of adaptive design, in that your site is learning more about what the user's doing, and maybe it's using inputs like GPS or camera input or who knows what in order to decide on how it's going to present information to you. And I think the idea of those truly adaptive sites is a little bit further down the road. And for a lot of organizations, it can in some ways be a challenge to think of how they would make use of information like that, let alone develop the content to really take advantage of it. So at this point, we really want to get you sort of over that first hump of dealing with the presentation of your content on different screens. And that all comes down to shifting the layout, preparing for the layout to change as screen sizes change. So a responsive design is really built on the idea that you have a series of breakpoints. And these are different page widths that will cause the design elements to reorder. So when you're between breakpoints, and you may have seen this if you take a browser for a site that you know is responsive and you grab the corner of it and you stretch it and shrink it, you can see elements on the page changing. So between those breakpoints, the items will change their size, text will reflow in the box, and it'll adapt a little bit. And when you hit one of those breakpoints, you'll see a sudden change in the configuration. So the boxes reorder, maybe they get more streamlined, maybe something disappears, maybe something's added in, depending on which direction you're going in. But the important thing is that these breakpoints are not really tied to the devices. It's not that you're designing one layout for a phone and you're designing one layout for a tablet and you're designing one layout for a desktop, because you don't know where in the spectrum these devices are going to fall. When you look at this chart here on the page, we've got a 320 pixel design and a 750 pixel design, but the 750 could be on a tablet, it could be on a tiny laptop, it could be on a really large phone, one of these phablet things that people are starting to use now. So this can really accommodate a wide variety of devices. Or maybe somebody's using their desktop computer and shrunk their browser down because they're interested in seeing what it'll look like. You just don't know how big the site's going to be. So you're creating a system that will grow and adapt as that screen size changes. Now, it's not a mistake that we have the smallest layout on the left here, and the screen size gets larger and larger as we move to the right. We tend to, English readers, read from left to right. So the idea is that you are starting on the left with this smaller screen size, and you are growing and evolving the site as you move to the right to a larger screen size. And that is the idea of progressive enhancement. So what we don't want to do is take a really big, heavily featured desktop design and then start dumbing it down for mobile. You want to determine, what is that solid core message that you have to tell, and how can you present it in a way that works well on a mobile size screen. This will really force you to prioritize your content. You have to really think about those elements that you have to be able to tell people. And you have to really be honest with yourselves about what is most important. And once you do that and you have a solid mobile presentation, you can start to build on it and you can enhance it as the screen size grows larger. Maybe you'll add things. Maybe you'll just change the way it's presented a little bit. And you want to be careful about that because you don't want to just add content to fill up real estate, as shown in this little Twitter snippet here. Mobile users really want to see our menu, hours, and delivery number. Well, yes, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I would suspect that just about any visitor to a restaurant website would want to see the menu, the hours, and the delivery number. I don't know whether or not desktop users would really want a giant picture of someone smiling at a salad. I suspect not. But that's the sort of addition that we tend to see. And I think we want to be a little bit smarter about how we're building on that. You should always be enhancing the experience, not just putting window dressing on. So the important thing to do is really identify the minimum amount of content and navigation that you need in order to make your design useful. So you really have to put the content first. And, as a content strategist, I have to say that I think this should always be the case. It doesn't matter whether you're doing your mobile site or your regular desktop site. You should always be thinking about your content first. If you aren't sure what you want to say or how you want to say it, maybe you shouldn't be saying anything at all. You need to take the time to really think about that message and maybe even write it down and craft that content. if you present designers and developers with your actual content, they can do a world of good in figuring out how to present it. You can always tweak the content later in response to layout decisions or even design decisions, but you really just don't have a leg to stand on until you have a sense of what you need to say. So what I want you to do is keep in mind this mobile-first mindset. And at New Signature, this is what we are doing now. So in the past year, we have really revamped our entire user experience design process to really better facilitate the development of responsive sites. We always begin site designs, and with a full discovery session where we're learning about the organization, learning about your goals, learning about your site experiences, learning about the content you have and the messages you want to say, and most importantly, learning about your users and your audience. And from that, we develop a sitemap, and we spend a good amount of time identifying and defining what those sites' content types will be. And it's the knowledge about those content types that lets us set up a series of HTML mobile wireframes, and that's what I'm showing you here. So we have these skinny, very vertical wireframes that clearly provide the hierarchy and prioritization for your content. It gives you a really good sense of content length and what people are going to be presented with, and it forces you to think about the interactions that are going to be required to help users get through that content. I was talking before about how sometimes you want all the content to be available, but you don't necessarily want it to appear in one big long stream. So you have to think about how are users going to get at that. And at the conclusion of this phase, when we have a set of mobile wireframes, we can then do some design work, and we can evolve this into a fully designed HTML prototype that shows how the site will respond to changes in screen sizes and how the design will affect its appearance. And this is where we start to identify those breakpoints and identify how we're going to change the way the content appears. And the key to making all of this work is building that content model and identifying the content types so that we can support a variety of different presentations. And it's this that leads to the idea of having adaptive content, content that will change for different devices. So whether you like it or not, your content is really going to go all over the place. And it's in your best interest to help it get there. And when I say your content's going to go everywhere, I really mean everywhere. We've got big screens, we've got little screens, we've got screens on your wrist, we've got screens on your face, even on babies' faces. We've got screens in the subway, we've got screens in your car on the dashboard. So certainly the presentation of your content needs to change in different environments. You're not going to do the same things on a watch as you are going to do on the wall in a subway. But you can have one single base of content, and if it is properly organized and modeled, those devices can decide what is appropriate to display and what makes sense to display to the user and how, so that they can take advantage of it. One of the things that we like to say is that content is like water. So I've heard a lot of people say this. This image is from Josh Clark. But the idea is that water takes the shape of whatever vessel you put it in. So, another way I like to think about it is that your content is the thing of value that you have. This is what you've created. In a lot of cases, your message is your product. And it's the substance. It's, the vessel that message comes in is much less important than what you're actually trying to say. So you need to do what you can to allow it to take the shape of any delivery mechanism and let the device decide how it's best to hold your content. Now, thinking about and creating structured content is what allows you to cater the content to the lowest common denominator, meaning a small screen, maybe a text-only browser, even a site-aided browser. So it's sort of ironic that by adding structure, you're actually making your content more fluid. And it is this structure that really enables your content to go anywhere. And this is the real challenge in making your site mobile-friendly. So I want to introduce the concept of blobs versus chunks. And this is the idea of unstructured versus structured content. And I want to first talk about blobby content. So first off, blobby content is not a judgment on content structure or even its value. It's just a description of how it's organized. You'll see that this example here, in fact, is taken from the New Signature website. And it's okay, some content needs to be more structured than others. But I want to use this as an example to show you what happens when you think about responsive design and your content is in giant blobs. So what we have here is a blog post with a lot of information at the top, a date, a title, a byline, some metadata, but then everything below that is just one giant blob. This is what's in your body. We don't do anything to separate out pieces of the story or even images or links or anything like that. Okay, so when you think about what's inside that body, we don't have the ability to identify those pieces, which means as we are trying to make our presentation adaptive, we can't do anything special with the different kinds of content that's sitting inside that body. We can't find the image and float it to the top or float it to the bottom. We can't find a quote and put it in an appropriate place in the way the paragraphs break. And we can't present a call out in a particular way because we can't find it. So the opposite of that is chunky content. Now, the ultimate example of chunky content is a recipe. It sort of drives me crazy that everyone uses this as an example, but it's so accessible, and man, it is super chunky. So it's really easy to show you all the possibilities. So if you look at this recipe for roast turkey, which maybe you wish you'd had last week, it's got all kinds of info. We've got title and submitter and metadata. We've got suggestions. We've got advertisements. We have interactive options and nutritional data. All of these things, and it's all identified. And that means that the possibilities are really quite endless when it comes to restructuring the presentation. We can reorder the content in hundreds of ways, thousands probably, but there's maybe a handful that are useful. We can add and remove elements, like pulling out advertisements, pulling out certain interactive options that maybe don't make sense on a particular device. We can streamline the presentation, and not just by showing everything in one long vertical column, but we could maybe layer content and require the user to tap to see more or go to a different, heaven forbid, page to see more, but making them do something with the device in order to see it all so they're not overwhelmed by the presentation. You may also need to present different versions, lighter images in a mobile device because you don't want to blow someone's data plan out of the water. Maybe you need to make sure that the video is not automatically played, that it's very optional so someone doesn't have to play it. So doing this really allows you to manipulate your content and manipulate the layout in ways that you don't have to control so tightly because you've identified all the content and now you can let it go. You can let this go out into the world and you can let the different devices decide how to display it. And they'll know what to do with it, and they'll do it in a way then that makes sense to the user. So chunks and CMS, usually when they're in the same sentence, we're using some phrase like blowing chunks. But in this case, I think chunks and CMS get along quite well. So when you think about it, organizing your content into chunks is really a natural fit for the CMS. Your CMS is a database. It wants the chunks. So even better, it has the ability to add that level and layer of abstraction between your editor and the layout. Your editors can really step out of that page layout mode and just think about the message, focusing directly on the content. And one of the nice things is that you can actually leverage your CMS to train your editors and explain to them what you want in all those boxes. Maybe you need different teaser titles for certain displays. Maybe you need to have a short teaser and a long teaser. Maybe you need to have different versions of the title to show up in different kinds of layouts and different lists and different navigational schemas. You can do all that in your CMS, and then your authors don't have to know where or how that title is going to appear in all the different layouts. They just have to know that they're going to provide it. Sometimes it'll be used, sometimes it won't, but they just need to fill it out. If you separate the authors from the presentation, you really let them focus on the words. And I think sometimes you might hear the argument that this is really constraining and you're confining the author in such a way that they don't have creative freedom to write about what they need to write about. And I have heard sort of the opposite argument sometimes from people like journalists who know they don't just write willy-nilly a story. They know that they have 500 words, they have a 2-inch column that's this tall, and they can use this much space, and they have to have one headline and one subtitle, and this is how they're going to appear on the site. And having that structure and a deadline gives them a focus that allows them to really provide the right content. So you need to kind of think about this the same way, that it's providing that focus. It's giving you a structure to write in so that you have something that you can really take advantage of. So, and I think, you know, by providing the inline instruction instead of what you mean in the past you may have had huge governance documents with lots of policies or separate style guidelines and all kinds of things. I mean, in this case, you're taking the styling decisions out of the editor's hands. You're alleviating them of that decision. And you're explaining to them all of the different policies and rules that they have to follow in order to make this work. So it can just make things a lot more easy to digest. All right, so it's very quiet out there with everyone muted. So I have to ask if you're all still with me. I know this has been a lot to take in. It's a lot to think about. And the thought of a complete overhaul to your CMS and your content structure and your site design and the way you work, I mean, it's overwhelming. But I want to assure you that you don't have to bite this all off at once. You can take baby steps. I find looking at tiny feet to be calming, so hopefully you do too. If you know, we can get a little perspective here. So remember the picture of the guys climbing Mount Everest in the beginning. Just remember that once upon a time they were babies too, and they had to learn to take steps one at a time just like everybody else. So we have some all right, I'm unmuted. Can you all hear me again? I don't know what happened there. I got muted by the system. Sorry. Okay, so I was giving you a bit of good news. The idea is that you don't have to do this all at once. You can evolve over time. So I have a few suggestions for you. One is to think about structuring a little bit of your content at a time. So I think most sites out there have one primary content type that is kind of their thing. Like for Amazon, it's their products. For you, it might be your publications. It might be your initiatives pages. It might be your projects. You probably have one particular content type that is really like 90% of your message. And if you look at that one content type and you think about how to break it down and how you can add a little bit of structure to it, that's biting off a huge chunk of what you have to do in a way that's not so overwhelming. And when you do that, you can then take the next step and maybe try doing a mobile wireframe of that particular content type and see how it feels and float that around your organization and think about, you know, how would you deal with presenting this particular type of content in a responsive way. Don't worry about doing it yet. Just think about how it might be possible. Another option, another place to start is to look at your homepage. Making your homepage responsive will help you out when people are sort of hitting you for the first time or coming to your site on any kind of device. You know, if all you can give them is one page, give them the front door so that at least it feels a little bit better. And it'll give you a little bit of practice in, you know, how you want to present things, and it'll be tackling head-on the most painful political discussions you're going to have in the organization, which is, you know, how you are going to prioritize content on the homepage. So approach that as a singular project and get it done, and you'll have gotten a really big foot in the door for moving forward. once you've kind of done some of this planning, you can actually make your primary content elements responsive. If you do have that one content type that, you know, accounts for 80% of your content, go ahead and make that responsive. That's what people are looking at. That's what they're coming to you for. And since it's one consistent content type, it's still only one piece of work. It just affects the content all across your site and stuff that people are really coming to you for. And this all boils down to the idea that you need to focus where your users are focused. You want to spend your effort where your users are, because that's going to give you the most bang for your buck. All right. So now it is time for our final reality check. I want you all to hopefully walk away from this presentation realizing that it is time to set your content free. It's time to take it out of these page layouts and make sure that it's something that can, you know, adapt to a variety of different screen sizes. And when you do set your content free, I don't want it to look like this. I don't want you to feel like this snarling giant bear is coming at your face. I hope that by adding some structure and really thinking things through, instead you will feel like angels are singing and there's peace on earth and your website is happy. So that is what I have to say today. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties. I think we have about 10 minutes left for questions. And if you want to go ahead and type questions into the chat window, I think Christine will help me moderate those and we'll see what I can tell you. So again, thank you very much.
Jessie, thank you so much. That was amazing. Technical difficulties notwithstanding. We are actually going to call it a wrap just in the interest of time. I've got some questions that are going to be filtering in. I'm going to be sending out a link to the recording to everybody who signed up, and a link to the future webinar series. We're going to maybe see if we can schedule a future session with Jessie for a little bit of Q&A and maybe sort of a deeper dive on some of the things that we've talked about here. I think that there's a lot happening, and I think that certainly there are additional talking points that we could offer. So just in the interest of time, and I know that we had quite a rocky start there at the beginning, we're going to call it a wrap here. So I'm going to stop the recording.